I'm sitting here with in my opinion, one of the most experimental writers of the 21st century, Alistair Fruish, who I first met as... when did I first meet you, Alistair?
You met me a week or two after 9/11 in 2001. So, in my mind, you are sort of joined irrevocably with the war on terror. That beard.
Yes, I have. I must admit, I have been randomly picked out for explosives at American customs at times. Yeah, we met at a training for the yearly training for the Writers in Prisons Network.
You see it that way. I see it as an initiation into a strange cult run by Clive Hotwood, who trained us all into working in behind bars. With your help, you were, I guess you've been my mentor. And you helped train not just me, but loads and loads of other writers who've worked in prison. Geraldine Ryan, Dorothy Hammond, to name just a couple that come into my mind.
Well, yeah, because when I first went, I joined them. We had our yearly training. I think it was only a couple of days then, or 3 days. I think it was a week when you joined, wasn't it?
It was a week. That's why it was like an initiation into a weird cult, where everything else was taken away, and your idea of prison was inculcated into you quite strongly, and you weren't allowed to leave.
Because Writers in Network was the Arts Council asked Clive Hotwood to just organise the writers, the stack of writers that were working around prisons, and sort of formalise it and give us training really on how to operate behind the walls and the wires, behind the gate.
Well, to learn from everybody else's mistakes and actually be intelligent about it, not just reinvent the wheel every time, but learn about what you could do, what you couldn't do, what was possible, how to get round things, how to use keys. So none of it was too much of a surprise. I mean, it's still quite a surprise, but they did their best to get us used to the idea of working in a prison.
Yeah, I must have been quite early on it, but I remember being on my initiation. We'll call it an initiation, I think. I'd worked in prisons before, but my initiation into this strange cult was in Yorkshire at that point, probably in some obscure farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. But there were some wonderful people that had already done a lot of experimental work in prisons. There was a woman, Wendy, someone I think it was, who
I know her.
Who had been travelled around America looking at a scheme where people were sentenced to read.
That was Texas, and it was called Stories Connect when we did it, but that's where she picked it up.
But it was there. It never took off in this country.
Was it Mary Robinson? Is that her name?
No, that was the person who did Stories Connect, but it wasn't the person who brought the idea to Clive. That she'd travelled around America. She'd done several places. The extraordinary place was Texas, because Texas has got a reputation for being really repressive in its prison system. But the weird thing about America is that there's some really experimental stuff that's going on that would never happen here. So people, instead of being sent to prison, were sentenced to read. And they'd have to come once a week, and there'd be a sentencing judge, there'd be a literary expert, there'd be a board, and it was like being told to do your homework, except if you didn't do your homework, you didn't get detention. Well, you did get detention, you were sent to prison. But they found not only a reduction in people doing crimes again, but even if they did do crimes, there was a reduction in violence. And I think that was incredibly important. If someone's breaking into my house, I'd prefer them just to take my stuff rather than shoot me. So, and I think that in general we need a proper audit of the effect of schemes like that. And interestingly, they found the things that had most effect were the classics, rather than modern novels. You know, because the characters were, they could relate to the characters, and it was especially effective with women prisoners. And they did get something. It was Mary Wells, I think, who got the Stories Connect going, but that was only inside prisons, because it would be almost impossible to do something like that in this country, because the right-wing press or the popular press would do a shock horror story about being soft on criminals. It didn't matter that it was effective, and I think that's been a problem right through. I mean, we've even had it in our work, when after there was a shock horror story about a comedy program in one prison, and Jack Straw came into Parliament and said, "I've already closed it down." But the effect right through for artists working in prisons is that there was a notice sent to all governors that anything going on in prisons must have a positive effect that could be measured, and that was very difficult for us, I think.
That was called the public acceptability test, and it lasted a few years, and it put back quite a lot of projects and stopped them happening. But then, as is the way with things, they realised that was a mistake and kicked it out.
Yes.
And I don't think, you know, it's widely known within the justice system how successful arts can be. But like you say, it's a political hot potato.
Well, in one prison we went to where, and I think you were part of this, we, as well as doing our residencies, I mean, the important thing about working with Alistair, I've worked with, I mean, there's sort of hundreds of artists and writers have passed through the Writers in Prisons network, but Alistair and I, for some reason, worked together at several prisons, lots of prisons in fact, but also outside the prisons. But there was one scene which was a short 1 week or 3 week project in one prison, and they had some money left over in the budget or something that had to be spent, and they decided to do an arts festival. And
yeah, that prison doesn't exist anymore.
yeah, so and there was a lot of reaction from the officers. You know, why is money being spent on that? We could build a canteen or something. But when we'd finished, they found the number of nickings of offences within the prison had been radically reduced during the festival. So it is measurable.
No, actually, more interestingly than that, that was true, but it was specifically violence, and violence against staff went right off. They just disappeared, went virtually down to nothing. So, you know, it was beneficial to the officers to support the work because they weren't getting lumped.
Yeah, so together we've done, I think, you know, as well as we have sort of supervised each other to an extent. I've been the network representative, I think, occasionally in some of your residences, and you've been the network representative of mine, where we sort of went through reports. But more importantly, we did a lot of projects together. Initially, I think it was me bringing you into the prisons I was working in, and then vice versa. We've done films.
We've done films, radio plays, poetry. We've done all sorts of things together. But specifically, there isn't, you know, this particular thing. It doesn't exist like it used to anymore. I'm pretty much the only person from that world who's still a writer in residence, as far as I know. Most of the people I'm in contact with.
I think there is one in the Young Offenders Institute, isn't there?
Not as part of the previously part of our network, I don't think. And there used to be about 80 writers at one point, you know. So it's just.
Oh, they were. The one I'm thinking of was in a prison and then went to another. Was part of us, and then went to another prison and built their own project.
You mean Julian Earwicker? He retired from it.
oh, well, that shows how out of touch I am. But that managed to keep going for quite a long time. But
I
I think,
basically had to raise all the money for the last 12 years to carry on doing things in prisons because it was all cut. Yeah, that's all. It used to be the important thing really about putting artists into prison, independent artists that can do things, is that they join up what is otherwise siloed, and they connect them connect up different parts of the prison in interesting ways, and they're able to work with people who otherwise wouldn't fall through all the gaps. And
yes, I remember one project we were doing. There was one guy, well, several projects that we did together with people that had been kicked out of everything, kicked out of prison education, that no one would have them in their groups. And sometimes I'd find them in corridors, in prison corridors, looking lost. And I'd say, John, have you got anything going on at the moment? No one will have me in their group. And if you imagine, sort of a place where, it's not like being kicked out of school, where everyone in there has been sentenced. And so, they're not the easiest people anyway, and to be the least easy people amongst people that aren't easy. But we very often pick them up, and I think that's what the prison governors loved. I mean, there was some prison governors who specifically said, we reach the people that can't be reached. And we found one person that was, he was within continuously whether he was going to be sent to a criminal psychiatric facility, or he wanted to stay within the system, but because the ordinary prison system. But he actually stopped me in the corridor and said, no one will have me in. I said, well, we've got this play going on. And he kept putting suggestions in for the writing of the play, which were completely off the wall and didn't fit at all. And but he gave us the last line. It was fantastic. And we made it as a radio play, I think. And
was this us?
That's you do.
Oh yeah, I do remember that.
You remember that? It was.
I remember him.
When we were creating plays, we would probably, unless we were doing the pantomime, not have it set in prison, but try and get it with other places that men were isolated, and in this case, it was a group of men going down in a diving bell for something.
It was a science fiction thing set sort of around an oil rig or something, wasn't it? I
Yeah.
seem to remember. But the other side of things, the other important reason to have independent artists in prison is they help germinate things that turn into or support things that become bigger. For example, they supported the Kersler Awards. They supported early work by writers, helped feed into what became National Prison Radio. I don't think that would have existed in the same way without certain things happening. And of course, with you, the big thing was when you became writer in residence, storyteller in residence.
Oh, the first story. That was my first residency.
That led to Storybook Dads, which is an important thing that you didn't create it, but.
Yeah, I mean, Clive trained some people, including me. Well, I don't know that I had any training. I kind of went in because I was taken as a storyteller, and I was told how it worked, and Storybook Dads is really important because it was created so dads could stay in touch with their children, and by recording stories from children's storybooks, and so the child could take out dad's voice, whatever the situation was at home, and listen to it. But the other effect on it is that because an enormous number, a great percentage, you probably know the percentages of people with literacy difficulty in prison, it's something like 60%, isn't it? Maybe more.
I don't know, it's huge.
But it's huge. And if you sat in your cell reading children's books, everyone would make fun of you. But if you say, I'm learning this book, I'm reading this book for my child, because there's this sort of sentimental view of children. Everyone's got a almost picture postcard view of their children, and it doesn't just apply to prisons, it applies to anywhere where parents are away from their children for a period. And I think that's quite important, that it's just one situation out of many where parents are forced to be away from their children, whether it's for work or because they're banged up. There's a lot of crossovers there, but they could increase their literacy because they were at the right. These books were at the right level, and in fact, I had one prisoner who'd never read a book in their life, and I had to teach them word for word, page by page, and so we recorded it, and then I edited it down, took out all the gaps and so forth. But they managed to send this thing to their child, which was a huge thing for them and a huge thing for their child. So I think this, and then someone took it on whose name I've forgotten. I've written it down somewhere. Who took it on? Who actually took the scheme and turned it into a national charity, created workshops in one prison where the prisoners themselves were doing the editing, and it's become a huge worldwide thing. All I can claim is to have got the first worldwide publicity for it, because when I got to the prison, it was in all the newspapers, and the idea of a storyteller in residence in a prison obviously created, it was newsworthy because it was January and slack news time, and so but because we were able to talk about the Storybook Dad scheme, that was a positive story, and the story, instead of dying in 3 days, ran positively for a whole month, and it went all over the world. So I go to Texas, for instance, and there's because we're on public radio in America, and both Canada and USA. And there the scheme is run by the relatives of prisoners. So versions of it have appeared all over the world. Which, and here, of course, Sharon, I think her name is, has turned it into this massive charity, and really, really great scheme.
So going back to my original point then, so when you put an artist into a prison, you don't know what it'll do. It can lead to all kinds of incredible things, or support things that are already happening. But that policy of doing that doesn't happen anymore. There was, for various reasons to do with the way that funding streams work, and it's just died.
Alistair, what do you see the obstacles are to making change in that?
The two main streams of money, either from the Arts Council or from the prison service itself, need to be opened up so that it's easier for independent artists to...
Is there a blindness to the effect? Is there any kind of
no, it's more
reporting?
No, I think it's more the way that bureaucracies work. In order to get money to make things happen in a prison, you have to be quite a big organisation in order to have the time to fill in the paperwork, and you have to bid for those things. As in the past, the governor could just get you to do it, in which case you could have a bit of money that you could use as match funding to draw down other funding. Now you have to bid to get that particular job, so you wouldn't be able to use the money for it, guarantee that there would be that money in order to use it to draw down other money. So as a production hiccup, so the prison could advertise for a certain kind of job, but it couldn't be as flexible as it was in the past. So it's and also there's a lot of the charities that had money before have been affected by a series of financial shocks that have affected the entire economy, and there's not so many of them anymore. So it's
difficult.
It's very difficult.
Could I ask you both to tell me about your practice before prisons and how prisons has affected your own personal practice. What have you got out of it? How has it changed your perspective?
Well, I think for me personally, it's it's made me better tempered. Because you have to navigate through bureaucracies and a very rigid structure, and it's increased my discipline, my self-discipline in certain areas. But I think part of it is meeting people like Alistair, and Alistair in particular, who's opened me up to things that I didn't know about. I mean, we've done projects together, like comic book projects, because Alistair's been involved with comics forever, and we've done stuff outside prisons with that. And when we haven't just worked in prisons together, we've worked out on in parks and community in community situations, which was what I think that's something I took to the table. And Alistair's just an ideas man. He takes ideas and makes them manifest, which is where. And now, of course, Alistair being the survivor and knowing where to draw money from, I now do lots of stuff on Alistair's projects. I mean, well, I say lots. We've done quite a few things together that Alistair's projects has run. So I think it's difficult to pin down. I mean, it certainly had an effect on how I view my own children, because I was working with men who were away from their children. So I don't think it's just practice, but it's how it affects your whole psychology.
Well, I didn't learn to read fully until I was quite old. I'm dyslexic. That's what drew me into working in prisons in the first place, because I remember reading a statistic that pointed out how many people in prison were dyslexic. And clearly a lot of people in prison are school damaged in one way or another. They've been alienated from the education system, and that's one of the things you discover. And so that was what drew me into it. In terms of my own practice, I guess I've used a lot of restrictions in my work, and prison is one series of big restrictions and different things that you've got to get around if you want to make anything happen. So perhaps that, and that I wrote a book which is kind of the repository for most of the things that I learned in prison, which is called The Sentence, and that's one sentence long, 47,000 words, entirely made up of words of one syllable, with no punctuation, and it's about somebody with reading difficulties, and it kind of causes reading difficulties in some people who try and read it, and I think that's, it kind of mirrors prison in some ways, the effect of it. You came to one of the readings.
Well, yeah, that was extraordinary. I mean, it wasn't just an experimental book, but it was presented with different people, readers that would take over from each other.
Non-stop.
Non-stop, and even if you went to the toilet, someone would follow you in and read it to you. And from my point of view, I mean, I went to see the one at the Cockpit Theatre, which was the first public reading of it. And what I found extraordinary, apart from the piece of work itself, was that I didn't fall asleep. And that might sound not extraordinary, but I have a thing called Erland's, which is a perceptual problem, and it tends to make you fall asleep in all sorts of circumstances. You can just fall asleep, fluorescent lighting, all sorts of things,
driving.
No, I only fall asleep occasionally when I'm driving. But
just picking up on that, John, when you started saying that, I thought you were going to refer to a different effect it has. The sentence is 4 hours long, and I've only listened to a tiny part of it. But what I thought you were going to say, which is what I experienced, it hypnotises you, and suddenly you get a sense. You have no sense of time. You don't know how long you've been there listening to it. You don't know if you've been there 10 minutes or 40. You have no idea.
Oh yes, it's certainly hypnotic, and in the sense that you say, it does hypnotise you, and that's part of how it works. You're in while you're listening to it, you're in trance, a trance state. So,
I see it as a very kind of as you were talking, Alistair, it occurred to me. A lot of neurodivergent people look for personal experiences to find a point of empathy with others, and that whole book is a search for the right level of empathy with those individuals that you've been working with. It seems to me.
Well, it's interesting that quite often, because writers don't get the privilege of being in a room with people when they experience their entire book often, and I have been on many times now, and one of the things that happens is people at the end cry, which I think is really, it made me want to cry, and I wrote it, and that was a surprise, because I hadn't experienced it in that way really. I put it together in little bits, and the power of the overall thing was really.
So that work has emerged from you dealing with people in prison situations. It's expressed your feelings about that. What has it led you to think about the future of your writing, or the form your writing should take?
Well, every time I write anything new, whatever it is, I sort of start again and consider the way that the form meets the material. So I do that every time, but sometimes it comes out completely differently. I don't know what the next thing I will write will be like, because it will be a new challenge to me.
Yeah, that reminds me of, like when I'm running writing workshops, I use a line from Ralph Waldo Emerson, which is, let the subject dictate the form.
Yeah.
So when people ask, what's your style, what's your this, so it's, they ask you to describe your poetry or your writing, and you say, well, I don't know. I mean, I know I use certain things, like I use jazz rhythms quite a lot, but I mean, I think the other thing that happens in prisons, that certainly from my point of view, is you actually finish the projects, because your people, in prison, people don't have a sense of time. You learn things from prisoners as well. Obviously, you learn things from every human being you meet. But I remember I brought Benjamin Zephaniah, great dub poet, into a prison, and people were very excited about him coming in. And then on the day he came in, it was before the days of in-cell tellies, and there was an Ice-T film on the telly, so everyone went to association to watch the telly. But people, I asked someone, like, you've been really excited about this for weeks, and then you didn't come. And he said, well, when you're in prison, you want to forget about time, or else you'd be thinking about every day, and it would pass slowly, and you get through your sentence by forgetting about time. And I thought that was interesting. And it gave me I've now forgot about time completely, so, which much Alistair's disapproval, because he's trying to get me to write this book at the moment. But
yeah, tell me something about that chemistry between you two. It's like
well, it's my mother.
Observing from the outside, there's like it's like I often talk about. Sometimes you need a little bit of grit in the oyster to make the pearl, and it seems like you're each other's bit of grit.
Does it?
No, I hate it. No, the thing is,
I need grit in order to suffer him.
No, in prison you have to. Well, if you're brought in for a project, it has to happen. Well, partly for financial reasons, or else you don't get employed to do the next project. But you kind of feel obliged to make it happen. And of course, the circumstances are sometimes impossible. For instance, we were doing one project together, and everyone had signed up for the week I was in, and everyone who'd signed up had been shipped out to another prison, and so, but which was kind of embarrassing because we had an empty room, and because I thought, well, it has to happen. I then went out on the wing and just shanghaied a random group of people that weren't the faintest bit interested, and then and so it's the challenge to get them interested. And it was a Shakespeare project as well. So, you know, I'm doing a bit of Shakespeare. Do you want to come in? And then it turned out you could never get people into the whole group in at the same time, because it was people were always going to go and see their lawyer or healthcare or something like this. So the idea of doing a live performance was impossible. So we recorded a radio play, because you could record that in separate bits with whoever was in the room. And owing to the skill of the people we brought, mainly Dorican, who had the job of editing, Dorican Hammond, who was another one of the writers that we were.
She won a Sony Award for National Prison Radio at one point for her show.
Yeah.
But that thing of stopping people and talking to them and engaging them is something that which you made happen then. I remember we were employed by Barry Hale to go to part of Northampton and stop people and ask them what they thought should be happening in their area. And you had a flip chart.
Yeah, the question was, if I ruled, and you'd say, if you were king or you were queen of this area, what would you do?
And we had all these young Herberts cycling around us, looking at the camera and thinking whether it was worth stealing. And at one point I looked down and the flip chart was on fire. Somebody set fire to it. And I realised that our work in prisons had quite an effect on us when we just gently put it out and carried on talking to the children.
I was writing with my hand and putting out the fire.
Nobody got annoyed or accusatory. They just put it out and carried on talking to the kids. And that was good. That worked well.
Yes, that was an example of how prison goes. You know, like you have to be quite cool, because you've got no, keep your down, because you've got no authority really. If you make threats, you can't carry them out, especially working with young offenders, and you can't carry out the threat because you've got no power to do that. If you press the panic button, which is to bring officers in, you've then lost all your credibility. So you have to find other ways of dealing with things.
Have you ever pressed the panic button?
No, but I have been there when someone I brought into prison did. They were trying to put on a light switch, and he happened to be black with long dreads and was wearing jeans, which is a pleasant thing. So. And he said, and we went into the library, and he went to put on a light switch and press. I don't do that, but 2 seconds too late, and he pressed the button. So there was this huge thundering, like there's a herd of elephants coming down the corridor, and there was all these incredibly large officers about to come in, and I'm across, because I'm what's in my mind is that this is, I've got a black guy with dreads and jeans, and I'm alone with him in the library. They're not even going to ask the question. He's just going to be tucked out, and so I'm across. My man just said he'd never seen me move so fast in my life. I'm across the doors like that, saying, "He's with me."
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's been interesting moments, but I think one of the things you take out once you go, one, it's a privilege having to be back there.
But what you were saying, just to say about like you don't press the button, but what you do, and I think it's a good thing to take.
Is know where the button is.
No, is to keep. If you promise to do anything to anyone, you absolutely do it.
Yeah.
If you promise to somebody who's banged up that you're going to bring them a book, you bring them a book. It's best not to promise.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'll try.
You keep it,
yeah,
because these are people who have been let down consistently their whole lives, and they expect you to do it too. So you don't.
Yeah,
and that's on the other end. That's how you build.
Yeah,
respect.
So I mean, I never promised. I sometimes go, I'll try, but I think an important thing to remember is that everyone behind bars is. Most people, well, everyone behind bars is a human being. Most people have got a chink there of positiveness that can be built on. And you're meeting people in probably one of the worst parts in their lives, and it's it's just building on that positivity. I think it's you can't make great claims. We're part of this. If it actually works out for those people, we're part of that jigsaw that made it work out.
Between us, we've worked in over 100 prisons. You realise that?
We've done a lot, and so we must have met some. So it must have had an effect on some people, and I've only met one person who I know because we met him 8 years later at a conference, and he was a speaker at the conference, and he'd been clean and out of trouble for 8 years as a result of being, and as he had been in my play, and the last time I'd seen him, he was waiting, he was refusing to get on the stage and was waiting for to be just because he'd mucked about the night before, and he was on a report, and but he went on my stage. He said I loved it, and then he joined a theatre company, and that will have saved, just from the most right-wing point of view, I've probably around £60,000 a year to keep someone inside. So that would have saved the country 8 times 60,000. And if you want an excuse to put artists in prisons, one person, that's that amount of savings.
Yeah. I mean, basically, everybody gets out apart from a handful of people. What do you want them to be like when they get out and move in next door to you?